Hi, I'm Roberta. Welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to make gnocchi, one of my favourite forms of pasta, potato gnocchi. When I asked Lucio if gnocchi were popular in Liguria, he said, "Oh, mamma mia! On a special occasion, we call our friends and we say, come over, mama's making gnocchi." So, we're going to make gnocchi. Few tips for making gnocchi. One of the most important things is we want to keep the potatoes dry, because we want to add as little flour as possible. The more flour in your gnocchi, the heavier and stodgier they tend to be. So the best way to keep the potatoes dry, rather than boil them, we're going to bake them. And we're not just going to bake them, we're going to bake them on a bed of rock salt. So some rock salt on a baking tray or in a baking dish, a little bit more. Enough to form a good bed for our potatoes. Pop the potatoes on there and the salt draws some of the moisture out. Now this does take, even with the smaller potatoes, at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. So you want to get your potatoes on and then I'll show you what you do with them when they're ready. So I know our potatoes are nearly ready. It's time to get some flour onto our chopping board. This is one of those dishes where we don't need a mixing bowl. We're just going to make it old-fashioned style, straight on the board. So we're sifting in our flour. We'll add a good pinch of salt. Let's see how our potatoes are doing. So here are our potatoes. The skin is really quite crisp and dry, and we know they're ready when a wooden skewer passes through them quite easily. And now, while they're nice and hot, we want to cut them in half, pop them in our potato ricer. Now you could use a moolie, you could mash them, but if you're going to mash them, you're going to have to wait until they're cool enough to peel. And that's a shame, because the hotter they are, the drier they're going to be, because they're going to keep steaming. And we have a bonus recipe. Once we do that, we have a very dry potato skin. So there's our last half potato going in there. There's our last potato skin. All that beautiful soft potato. We'll just get rid of these and I'll be back. Now because this is steaming hot, we're going to start by cutting the potato into the flour with a pastry scraper. We have one egg yolk that we're going to add in there, and you can see there's very little flour, which if the potato's nice and dry, that's the aim. Now that yolk is going to heat up once it hits the potato. That's why I gave the flour a bit of a mix first. Let's get it all in there and keep going with our pastry scraper. So it's just going to take a couple of minutes. You can certainly use your hands, but this is like making scones. You want to handle this dough as little as possible, and that's why the pastry scraper comes in handy. So once you have your flour and your egg cut in there, it is time to get in with your hands. You need to bring it together into a soft dough and make sure that egg is well mixed through. But remember, the last thing you want to do is knead it. You are just forming a soft, well homogenized dough. And then we're going to roll it out and cut our gnocchi. Okay, here we have it, our gnocchi dough. I'm going to clean this up, dust it lightly with flour, and then we'll roll them and cut them. So once we have our gnocchi dough ready to roll, we want to divide it into roughly 3 equal portions. Now, there are flecks of egg yolk through that. It's not all completely homogenized. That's fine. Better that than over-handling it. So each one we're going to roll out on a flour dusted bench, just lightly with our hands, into a log about 2 centimeters wide. You can make it any width you want. This is just the way we're doing today's. And we're just rolling that back and forth to get our log. There we are. Now I like 2 centimeters, so now we're going to cut these into lengths of about 2 centimetres. They can be shorter, they can be longer. Gnocchi come in all shapes and sizes. And it's that easy. Those, we'll get rid of that scrappy bit at the end, those are gnocchi now ready to go into the water just like that. So we can pop our gnocchi in the water and cook them just like this, little fluffy pillows. But we can also get a gnocchi board and roll them along to get that traditional ridged shape. I don't know for certain, but I'm convinced that this must be modelled on an old-fashioned washboard, because I can imagine the women would have used whatever was at hand. The washboard was freshly scrubbed and they would have rolled the dough down there, or down an old washboard, perhaps saved just for that purpose. And the beauty of the ridge shape is it holds the sauce better. But these are going to be delicious whether you roll them down a gnocchi board or not. So as our gnocchi are rolled, we can just pop them on a flour dusted tray. If they're going to sit around for a while, we can give them a bit of a roll. We don't want to coat them with too much flour, but we also don't want them to stick together. So we'll just pop them aside separately while we get our water on to boil. So our gnocchi are rolled, whether they're these grooved guys rolled down the board or whether they're just cut into little pillows. I've left some as pillows so I can show you both. We're going to put a large saucepan of water onto the boil. Now I want you to start measuring the salt for your pasta water. It is important, and there is a rule of thumb that the Italians use: 10 grams of salt for every 100 grams of pasta and every litre of water. So if you're putting on 3 litres of water, you want 30 grams of salt. And it's worth using a good pure sea salt as well, because that salt is flavouring your pasta. So I have some well salted water on to boil. We'll take this to the stove. So our salted water's bubbling, in with our gnocchi, and we really are just cooking them for a minute or two until they float. I'll give them a bit of a stir around so they're not sticking to the bottom, and let's just wait and see what happens. So that's literally been about a minute and a half, and they are floating. Now, gnocchi can be cooked ahead of time and put into some really well iced water. So that's what we'll do with this lot. Now, as you've seen, if you want to, you can cook your gnocchi, chill them down quickly in a big bowl of ice water. You want it really cold. Once they're nicely chilled, get them out, just pat them dry very carefully. They're quite resilient at this stage, but you don't want to crush them, and pop them on a plate or in a bowl and just roll them with a little olive oil. Now, like that, they can be covered, refrigerated, and reheated the next day. So if you want to do your gnocchi ahead of time, you do them like that, cover them in the fridge, bring your pot of salted water back to the boil, pop them in, blanch them less than a minute. As soon as they float into the sauce, carry on with the recipe. Makes it a really great do-ahead dish.